Imagine you have a gun and your home modem loaded and facing global security. Gateways to chaos, Stephen Mew. Give him a big hand, everybody. Yeah.
Hello, everyone. I'm very excited to share this topic with you today. Gateway to chaos, how we prove that the modem are the ticking time bomb that hacker can access everywhere. In this talk, we will share about many real-world vulnerability and cases. This weakness could be happen in your own home. Let me quick introduce myself. My name is Chiao-Lin, but you can call me Steven Miao. I'm currently as a senior researcher at Trend Micro Rating in Taiwan. I have several certifications, including OSCE 3. I have also received several CVE from a big company like the VMware and D-Link and Zyxel. I have given talk at events like the B-Side Tokyo, Hikang Bounty House, and the CyberSec conference in Taiwan. This year, I'm also the Hikang training speaker. At this DEFCON, in fact, I have 3 talks. One is this one in the main stage, and the other are the car hacking village and the IoT village. Okay, so what did we find during the research? Yes, we report several CVE in this research, and more CVE, and even more CVE still in the reporting process. Okay, last year, we found some critical vulnerability in D-Link devices. Sadly, D-Link say these are end-of-life devices and they will not patch or fix the issue. Also, in Taiwan, modem or the residential gateway are provided by ISP. User cannot change them by ourselves. At that time, there were about 60,000 of these devices in the world. The vendor refused to patch, and the ISP refused to replace them with the new one. Here's something interesting. Even though we know the device is vulnerable, both the ISP and the vendor refuse to fix or replace it. Oh, you might think, maybe we can just disable some vulnerable service from the setting page, right? But sadly, the control panel doesn't actually work. Even if we disable the service from the console, they are still available. The control panel is pretty much useless. Okay, also, we found some hardcode password in the device. This device is widely used by ISP in the United States. For example, the Mark Twain communications. We also found a critical vulnerability that can let attacker control the device all over the world. For example, in Europe, Asia, and the US. Okay, here is our agenda today. First, I will introduce the agenda and the 6 different methods about the devices. Our first story is about chaining several vulnerabilities together to achieve the remote code execution about 60,000 devices. The second story starts from a free Wi-Fi network on a bus. We would find a vulnerability there and discover the same bug could be used on even a water company in the United States and many large ISP worldwide. We even found a backdoor in this product, which means attacker can use it to control the device around the world. The third story is about Zyxel. Even though they are an CNA, they still not handle the problem well. Next, I will introduce a modem security scanner we developed. This tool can detect all the vulnerability we share with you today. And finally, I will share a summary, conclusion, and the main takeaways. Okay, let's get started. Generally, how do we connect a device to the internet? First, our laptop connects to a wireless router. Then the router connects to a modem with maybe PPPoE, and finally connect to the internet. So how do we prevent the cyber threat? Most of the time, we install the antivirus or maybe some EDR to stop the virus, right? But almost no one cares about the modem or the router. Usually, the router and the modem are the embedded system. It's hard to install the antivirus software on them. So, besides home environment, what about the critical infrastructure? Things like the water planet, the smart city, and even the rocket system usually connect the internet through a router. The router is placed behind the firewall, then connect to a modem, and finally to the internet. So we can say that every device behind the firewall is relatively secure, but any device in front of the firewall is at risk. Just like this, we secure all the devices that we can control. We can use all kinds of security measures inside the intranet, but for the gateway or the modem, it's much harder to install these protections. So, what is modem? A modem is like a bridge that connects you to the internet. There are many types like the cable, fiber, phone line, and even 4G LTE or 5G secure network. Modems are used in many places, at home, at business, and in the critical infrastructure. Basically, if you need to use the internet, you need a modem. During our research and the threat intelligence work, we found that many critical infrastructure are using the vulnerable devices. Hackers can directly break into their intranet and control these devices. For example, we saw this in a water planet in the US and some smart grid, oil and the gas system, and even the ATM network. We also found that some vehicle management systems are using this kind of devices. If you want to know more about vehicle, I have another talk at the Car Hacking Village just next 30 minutes after this talk. We have even found some government, military, and police systems using these vulnerable devices. In February this year in Taiwan, a home modem was used by a scam group to commit fraud worth about $60,000 US. This incident forced the ISP to replace the old modem with the latest one. So, we are just ordinary people. Why do the threat actor want to hack to our devices? It's because of the underground business called the residential proxy. For example, when we use the credit card to shop online, sometimes we will receive a verification OTP code, right? But sometimes we don't receive just to swipe the card and it's okay. It's because the 3D secure verification system checks for the abnormal user behavior. For example, if a user always shop online from New York, but suddenly the IP is from Las Vegas, it might trigger an alert. Hackers want to get more different IP address from the different place to bypass the 3D secure check. It's called a residential proxy. Many ISP in different countries force users to use modem and router that ISP provided. Users cannot use their own devices. This is done to reduce the support costs and for the ISP business model. They also say maybe it's for the security reason, but they don't maintain it. It's ridiculous. Recently, Europe has started to promote the router freedom, which means users can bring their own device to connect to the ISP network. Okay, let's share some more technical detail for our first case. Last year, I moved to a new house and asked my ISP to install the internet service. And as a hacker, I always test all my devices for the security before using them. So I test my modem provided by the ISP and discover more than 10 different vulnerable services in these devices. I believe it's a textbook level example for even an IoT penetration for a beginner. Okay, so when we get an IoT devices, the first step is to evaluate the possible attack path. For example, we can check the network access for both the WAN and the LAN side. We can also analyze the Wi-Fi signal, and we can try the physical intrusion by disassembling the casings. Okay. Okay, so here is a web login page for our target devices. So first, what would you want to do? Admin? No, it doesn't work. But we define some clues in the documentation. After analyzing the devices, we found several predictable credentials on it. Also, there is a one-side password that is not shown in the user interface. This is an ISP-defined backdoor for the maintenance purpose. And interesting is that the password for both the Wi-Fi and the web console is created using the device MAC address. As we all know, we can get the MAC address from the Wi-Fi BSSID or connecting to the LAN and checking the ARP packet, right? Also, we can access the physical device and maybe we can see the MAC address just on its label. Finally, if we can find a way to bypass the web authentication, we might also be able to retrieve the MAC address. Yes, we actually found a way to do this, and I will share more detail later. Also, we found some strange default settings. SSH and Telnet are enabled from the WAN side and disabled from the LAN side. Why? Okay, is this reasonable? I don't think so. Maybe it's for the maintenance purpose. The web portal is also provide a remote access control whitelist. This probably means to let only the certain ISP network segment to access the service. But sadly, as I mentioned before, this feature is broken. Any user from the WAN side can access all the WAN service. Okay. And sorry. There is a low privilege user account in the devices. The username and the password is both user. This low privilege account can only change the Wi-Fi SSID, Wi-Fi password, and their own password. The high privilege account is not for the normal user. It is only for the ISP engineer to set up the advanced function. When we change the low privilege user's password from the web console, we can see the request shown on above. In this example, we set the user2 name to user and the user2's password to user. Okay. Yes, we can use the burp suite to change the request. The low privilege user's ID is 2. We can change the ID to 1. And then use the low privilege session to change the high privilege user's password. In this way, you can achieve the privilege escalation. Okay, next, we can check the SSH and the Telnet service. Since we use the default low privilege account to get the high privilege password, now we can log in with the high privilege users. Yes, we found something interesting. The interesting functions are things like the ping test, trace route test, and other testing tools. You guess that these features are implemented using simple string concatenation. This makes them vulnerable to the command injection. Yeah. Yes, all of these functions have the command injection vulnerability, and then we receive 5 different CVE for them. Yeah, very, very easy, right? After getting the remote code execution, we can bring our own tool to extract the firmware. For example, we can use the BusyBox, Netcat, or the TCP dump to do more analysis. We can also check the partition and dump data from the device. For the password issue, we also found that the plain text chip secret stored in the devices. We can write a simple decode function to get any password or secret from the devices. After dumping the firmware from the device, we can do more reverse engineering. For example, we found several XGI paths in the THTTP binary. One interesting path is config.xgi. This path does not require any authentication. Any user can use the config.xgi to dump the device configuration. For example, we can get a MAC address from the device. And as we all know, the admin password is made from the MAC address. And one of the hardcode password cannot be changed. So we can use this function to get a root credential. We also found another path called the DELT file.xgi. This XGI path takes a parameter and is vulnerable to the path traversal. With the path traversal, we can read the system configuration file. For example, by using the path /sys class net eth0 address, this path, we can get an MAC address. Yeah. Once we have the MAC address, we can calculate the root password again. Okay, next is the interesting part. For the previous password change vulnerability, the key point is to changing the set sys user password parameter from the empty underscore the admin.xgi path. And for the previous authentication by path, we all know that the DLT file.xgi does not need any authentication. What if we change the parameter set sys user password within the DLT file.xgi? After testing, the answer is yes. We can use the DLT file function to send the change password parameter and change the root password without any authentication. Okay, let's go back to the change password API. Now that we have the firmware, we can do reverse engineering and review some code to understand all the parameter. For example, this does exe equal to CHT log. What does this mean? After checking, the exe parameter will eventually be passed to a exe shell function. And about CHT log, CHT stands for Chunghwa Telecom, which is an ISP in Taiwan. CHT log is an executable script. Yes, we can also find another command injection remote code execution in the web portal again. Okay. We also found another interesting vulnerability: insecure user session handling. If one user is logging, another person can just access the device without any authentication. I believe it's ridiculous. The session is stored on the server, and no any user cookie is needed in these devices. Here's a summary of the attack path. Once we get a web access, we can use the authentication bypass to retrieve the password, and even change the root password and log into the console. After logging, both the web portal and the SSH or Telnet console is vulnerable to the command injection, so we can do the remote code execution on it. It's very easy to combine this vulnerability into a full attack chain. About this case report, it's very, very interesting. When we report this vulnerability to the Taiwan CERT, the TW CERT CC, we also mentioned that this is very, very, very critical because we found many vulnerable devices in the Taiwan government networks. But the TW CERT CC replied that, oh, this device is end of support, so the vendor will not provide any help for this case. This CV report will be disclosed early. They did not work with the Taiwan government to handle the issue. Also, the Taiwan ISP, like the Chunghwa Telecom, was not willing to replace the vulnerable devices for that. And in November last year, D-Link market value dropped by the 30 million USD in just one day because of this case. Yeah, maybe I should consider shorting the stock before reporting the vulnerability. Online news like the Bleeping Computer report on this case. Okay. 3 months later, we discovered another modem model called the DSL 7740C. It's very similar to the previous mentioned DSL 6740C, and all the vulnerabilities are identical. It's very disappointing that the vendor did not disclose this existing of the twin model. By using the OSync tool, we found about 60,000 vulnerable devices online when the vulnerability were disclosed. And by July this year, about 8 months later, there are still more than 20,000 vulnerable devices in the world. maybe today still the 20,000 vulnerable devices. You can just use the payload and RCE that. Okay, here's a quick summary of the issue. First, the device should not use the predictable password. The MAC address is not a secret, right? For the privilege management, low privilege users should not be able to access the high privilege function. Also, the default settings on the WAN side are not secure. For the management level, it is also a problem that the vendor is not willing to fix the vulnerability. They did not disclose the related device model. As a researcher, we do not have enough visibility to find and buy all the devices to check the issue. ISP also have the responsibility for that. ISP refusing to replace the vulnerable device is a big problem. They provide the device, but they do not have responsible for maintaining them. Okay. Just drink a water. Next, let me to introduce our second case. This story is also quite expected. We start from a single bus and end up to reaching the entire transportation company. Here's how the story goes. One time, I was taking a bus and connect to its free Wi-Fi. It just happened to be during the period when I was researching the modem. So I start to look into how the bus Wi-Fi system is designed. First, when we connect to a device, I always check the ports which are open. What really caught my eyes in this time was the two strange ports, especially in the port 5555. Looking closer at the port 5555, it seems to be a running UPnP service. That's right, this device has a UPnP service enabled by default. Without any authentication, we can use UPnP to change device access ID, reboot the device, or even restore it to the factory setting by sending the UPnP packet. For example, we could simply ask ChatGPT to write a POC code that use the UPnP to change the device Wi-Fi access ID. Yeah. After checking out the UPnP port, let's take a look at the port 80. Actually, port 80 requires a username and password for the authentication. But if we take a closer look at the server header, we can see that it's running a BOA server. So we try to search any past vulnerability in BOA. We found that in 2022, that was an authentication bypass vulnerability in BOA. Okay, let me try it. We decided to give it a try by sending just a head request with curl. We were able to bypass the authentication restriction. Yeah, just it's simple. After the auth bypass, the next step was to look the interesting thing on the setting page. The change password feature caught my attention. We removed the type equal to password attribute from the HTML tag. And sure enough, we were able to directly see and get the password from the devices. Yes, we are an F12 hacker. If you know how to use the F12, the developer tool, you can easily to get the user's password. Okay. We can also combine the authentication bypass and the password retrieval step. In this way, we can get the device password in one go and then log into the system normally. Yeah. Yes, that's how we successfully get into the system. Of course, the SSH is also enabled in this device. We could use the SSH to access the device console. And next, SSH console has a ping function. And yes, you get it. We found another command injection vulnerability in the ping function. After getting a reverse shell, we noticed something strange in the etc password file. There was a user called Xindian. So what is Xindian? Xindian is a place in Taiwan which is also the vendor's headquarters are located. There's a strange to see a hidden account in the username after this place. Unfortunately, we could not brute force the password using the word list like the raw queue. So we try to find some clue in the firmware instead. After analyzing the firmware, we actually found the plain text password for this account. Just use several if and equal to concat that. Yes, we are able to use this password to SSH into the system. Within this account, we got the directly access to the shell, not just a limited configuration console. After entering the system, we start to do further testing and research inside. We found an interesting process called the MQTT sub running in the system. It will start from the command line with the certificate, IP address, and the credential all shown directly in the command. The CA-related file are also stored directly in the system's temp folder. Next, we try to connect to the system using like the MQTT client. We found that we could subscribe all topics and see the status report from the device all over the world. It looks like this MQTT feature also has the remote command execution capability, so we can control the device all over the world just by the MQTT. Also, some of these devices even have the GPS tracking feature. By checking one of the GPS location, we were able to find the bus company's parking lot. Next, we analyzed the data even further. We had found that the WAN side and the LAN side open the same port. All the devices can exploit from the both sides. We discovered that many important critical infrastructure were using this system, including the water planet in United States. Even more surprising, we found that most of these routers installed by ISP were still using the default password. This means we could access this device either through the MQTT or by using the hard-coded password. We could also see the related impact list on the product's official website. For example, the SCADA, and this also includes the various component of the smart city system. It also includes the power transmission line and even work communication inside the operating room, and also various the ATM systems. Finally, there were the energy sector. For example, the oil and the gas industry. Manufacturing automation device use this device as their router. Okay, let's quick sum up of this case. We can abuse the UPnP to change device setting without any restriction. We also use the web authentication bypass to get the plain text password from the device. After getting the password, we can access the backdoor through the SSH or use the hardcode backdoor password to get a shell. We can even use the MQTT to control thousands of devices. As soon as I discover this vulnerability, I report them to the TWCert CC again. This includes the 5 different CVE numbers we collected. After this CVE was published, we saw that the vendor honestly disclosed the other related product and had the same issue. They also provide a fix for all of them, which is something we should encourage. But we also found something interesting. This product is actually passed the Taiwan IoT cybersecurity certification. This shows us that we cannot fully trust this kind of certification, right? And after some time, a familiar story happened again. We found about main company, in this case, Billion, and he has a BEC branch in the United States. It's a subordinary. This branch also has many vulnerable model, but the vendor did not disclose this model in earlier CVE report. So we report this related vulnerability to the ZDI again. But this time, the vendor didn't respond at all. After waiting 4 months, this vulnerability were eventually disclosed public. Let's quick sum up the key point of this case. First, there are insecure default settings. For example, the WAN access to the web and the SSH interface by default, and unauthentication user being able to use UPnP. Another serious issue was storing password in plain text and the backdoor password, right? And this system is also had an outdated component, which made authentication bypass possible. There were hidden backdoors that were not disclosed, and all devices share the same MQTT credential. Finally, the vendor did not fully disclose all the affected models. Next, let me quick share our third case. Because of the previous case, I start to take the BOA authentication bypass issue even more seriously. Through the open source intelligence, we found that the Zyxel device had this same problem. We report this to the TWCC right away. Since the Zyxel is an CNA, which means they have the right to issue their own CVE. So we forward our finding to the Zyxel. Zyxel only replied that, oh, this device is EOL end of life. Next, we forward this email to information to the MITRE. MITRE mentioned that sometimes CNA will refuse to provide a CVE like this, but MITRE can sometimes escalate to case to just remind them about it. Okay, and in this then a month, we successfully received a CVE number for this case. This story shows us that if a CNA does not want to handle the EOL issue, we can just ask MITRE to help and put some pressure on them. That's that few examples and also quite interesting. They include a product from like the Nokia, Dashan, and the Hitron. These models are still very widely used in the home across Taiwan. First, we found a Nokia device that allows you to access the system log without any logging or the authentication. The syslog contains the MAC address, and the default password is just a combination of MAC address, just like our first case. So if we get the MAC address, we can log into the root console. And what's interesting is the Nokia P-Cert's response. They say, we do not treat this weakness as a vulnerability. We kindly ask you not to disclose any information about this publicly. But if it's not a vulnerability, then why shouldn't we share it? The logic doesn't make sense at all, right? And the fifth example is from the Dashan. Their product have the same UPnP problem. UPnP can be accessed directly from the WAN side. And there is also an issue where the MAC address can be leaked. We also report this related case to both the ZDI and MITRE. For the Hitron device, after connecting to the system using like the telnet, we saw a console management for the system setting. There was also a telnet function inside, and once again, we were able to find the command injection vulnerability through this feature. We also report this case to MITRE in the March of this year. Because of this, we realized there are so many of the overlooked vulnerability out there. So I developed a modern vulnerability scanner for users who don't need to know anything about the vulnerability or the device model. They just need to visit the website and click a scan. The idea behind this tool is actually very simple. We record the unique characteristic of all the vulnerability, and we use the banner grabbing to quickly to find the possible threat. Now, let's take a quick look about the demo video. On this page, users just need to click a start scan. After that, simply wait a few seconds. Our system will then check all the signature against the source IP and let you know if there is any vulnerabilities. While running this tool, we also found some interesting results. Some devices seem to match the vulnerable feature, but their server header shows like the Apache or the Python instead. It looks like someone is trying to research my research. Okay, finally, let's move on to the conclusion of this talk. Across more than 10 different device models, we found over 30 vulnerabilities. This issue covers ADSL, GPON, ONU, and the 4G, 5G router. Not only the home user, but also the business, factory, or the critical infrastructures are affected. We disclosed many pre-auth, RCE, and the hidden backdoor. Also, a lot of these products are the end of support, but they are still widely used, especially for the EOL, end of support issue. We believe vendors should clearly define an EOS timeline instead of sadly marking the device as the end of support just because the vulnerability is reported. It's common for the user to keep using the EOS devices for a long time. Vulnerability platform should not refuse to accept the report about the EOS, EOL product. This talk also showed us that the most IoT vulnerabilities are inherent problems. Devices often use the same code base. As a security researcher, we usually cannot fully find out all the affected models. For this, vendors should take more responsibility for that. For outdated software service, like the BOA case, vendors should keep a completely record of all the components they use. For example, they should manage and monitor with the BOA and to monitor with the SBOM, SBOM, for example, the software building material. Okay. Vendors should also evaluate the attack surface of their product, especially when it comes to insecure default setting. Unfortunately, many vendors don't even know the service they are running on their own product. For example, TP-Link's customer service once say form that their product doesn't support the telnet service and claim it's just a channel for the app to communicate. However, no more user can actually connect to it directly. This is a really ridiculous example. Yeah. Next is the issue of the backdoor. There is more and more evidence shows that the vendor like to keep the backdoor in their product. Sometimes it's for the maintenance purpose, and sometimes it's done on the purpose for the government or the company. We believe all of these backdoors should be disclosed. For ISP, we believe it's important to promote the router freedom. Users should be allowed to change their own devices. ISP should also closely monitor products and replace them before reach out the end of support. If there is a security incident, user must to be notified right away. For user, don't assume that the products from our ISP are always safe. Don't fully trust the cybersecurity certification either. Don't trust of the product from any brand and treat your modem or the router as the tier 0 critical device. Here are some final action items and the takeaway. Try your best to identify your modem and the IoT device model. Check if there are already end-of-life EOL or have any known vulnerabilities. ISP will not tell you about this issue. So keep track all of your devices and manage them careful. Don't trust every setting. Always use the port scan to check or confirm. If possible, closely monitor all the network traffic to detect unknown threats. Okay, this is all my sharing today. Thank you, everyone. And let me take a selfie. Thank you.